Recording in progress.
The thing about podcasting with podcasters is everyone's ready to go. So, I'm joined by Ryan Luis Rodreguiz, who is the missing guy from the Reels of Justice podcast when I had my epic award-winning episode with the Reels of Justice dudes. Like a month or two ago? I don't remember when I aired that, and so this is going to round it out actually and make it even better. Everyone's going to go back and pair this up. It's going to be a famous pairing, of all the of all the famous pairings that there have been of this podcast with other episodes of this podcast.
It'd be like baseball cards. You got to collect them all.
I mean, you got to catch them all. That's I like that. I'm building a great lore for the podcast. If the listeners would only believe it, it'll really go a long ways.
Now, the award you won, was that a Clio?
Yeah, sure. Is that a podcast thing, or is that?
I don't know. I think that's for commercials, but
okay.
It's the only fringe award that I know.
I always think it's interesting to see podcasters on podcasting forums complaining about podcast awards. That now I will give you. There's two complaints that I see. One of which I think is more valid than the other. One is. This seems like just somebody started it because there's not a lot of them, and so who are these people? The Podly Awards, or I just made that up. Maybe there's a Podly Awards out there that's real, but anything with the word pod in it could be started by someone as like, is this a scammy thing? What is this? So I get that. That to me is more valid. The second concern is that they cost money to enter your show, and okay, yeah, maybe that's annoying in a medium in which a lot of people are not making money off of it. However, it's kind of like one of those, tell me you don't know much about the entertainment industry without telling me you don't know much about the entertainment industry. Because all award shows require, entrance fees. The Oscars, the Emmys.
Especially the Golden Globes.
Yeah. Do they? Are they more?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because you have to bribe them to get the award. Like Sharon Stone famously gave them all like Rolexes and then still didn't win.
Oh no, what a ripoff.
Yeah.
I just learned recently that you have to pay. It's like somewhere like 50 or 100 grand for a star on the Walk of Fame. Now,
yeah, that sounds right.
You do have to apply for it, and they have to say that you deserve one before you're allowed to purchase one. But I had just heard that because somebody was talking about Bob Odenkirk, and what usually people will do is they will wait until they have the body of work where they think they can get it, but then they'll wait until they're attached to a project because then the studio will pay for it. So to promote
whatever works,
Mr. Nobody or whatever that was that he was doing at the time, or maybe it was Better Call Saul. I don't know who paid for it, but let's just say he's getting a lot of work. Good job, friend of the show.
Good job, Bob.
I like to think you'd be a friend of the show. I'm sure you're listening out there, Bob. We're pulling for you. So welcome to the show today. We're going to talk about movies in particular. That's kind of in your wheelhouse. Somewhere.
Yeah, that's my jam.
I have mentioned this before, but anyone who listened to that show where I had your compatriots from the Reels of Justice podcast, we had a discussion on there about, I brought up a movie that I remembered from maybe the 90s, and I think it was made for TV, and I had a couple of details in it, and Dylan Slender was like, I'm going to text Ryan. And before we had found it on IMDb, you answered with what it was. So I think you got you seem to know what you're talking about when it comes to movies.
Yeah, it helps to have a really sheltered life. Having a lot going on externally. I can focus on the things that matter, movies, the ephemeral thing, the thing that really counts.
I'm with you. I mean, anybody who listens to this show knows that I dedicate, quite a bit of a mental health and psychology podcast to media and culture as well. And I tend to actually think of movies and storytelling nowadays, particularly with some of the, I think superheroes are especially this way, but I think it's true with all of the stories that we're putting out there in the movies. It's almost like our mythology in a way, right? You look at other cultures and it's like there's their stories that have survived for all these years, and it's like Zeus and Thor and Jupiter. I could keep naming
Captain America.
Captain America. It's the same thing, and that's it's something that has become, for people to say like, oh, it's just movies. It's like it's a billion dollar kind of thing, and in a world in which we can all get really obsessed about the Nicole Kidman ad on the AMC, pre-trailer ad. How many people are talking about that, and yet we want to poo-poo how important movies play a role in our culture. So
we come to AMC theaters to laugh, to cry, to feel, because we need that. All of us. Can you tell how many times I've seen that goddamn thing?
Even heartbreak feels good in a place like this.
Yeah.
There's
we
a
could
sequel.
go someplace.
Did you hear?
We go somewhere where we've never been before.
There is a sequel to that coming. I read an article where they interviewed the writer. The writer is, I can't remember their name, but they made like, is it Shattered Glass or whatever, that movie?
Billy Ray?
Yeah, that's it, right? Yeah, I wrote the AMC ad, right? In fact, Nicole Kidman asked for him to be the one who did it. If I'm getting the name right, I'm going to double check, but... Yeah, Billy Ray. And talked about writing it and essentially trying to make a poetry about going to the AMC theater. But yeah, she had said, I'll do it if he writes it. And apparently that's just what I heard on something or something.
Yeah.
But
I have to see it once a week because I have the AMC A-list where you get 3 movies a week for $22. And it's a great, beautiful program that the only downside is you have to watch movies at an AMC.
Yes.
You can't go to a different theater. That's the only downside.
Right. It's an AMC program then, I guess. So
yeah.
Yeah. I've got there's quite a few theaters around here, so I'm not like I'm not really anti or married to any particular theater chain. So that's me. I don't have a favorite. Do you have a favorite? You're going to endorse it right here? It's embarrassing that AMC is a sponsor of the show, but whatever.
The only 2 we have around here are Cinemark and AMC, so I'm not drawn to either one. I would love to be near an Alamo Draft House, but
I've never been to one.
San Francisco. I've never been to one either, but Ben, who was on this show, goes there a lot, and he swears by it. And I would love to go there someday, but it's an hour away, so it's not really a convenient thing.
Yeah. We do have a pretty good indie scene. And there's an independent theater in Salt Lake, Utah, which it shouldn't be too much of a surprise to anyone who knows like about Sundance and things. Obviously, we have the Sundance Film Festival that's pretty big here. So there's a pretty healthy independent theater crowd in the city areas of Utah, which is kind of interesting. So you can go there.
We used to have an indie called Camera. And they were like specifically downtown San Jose, and then they completely shuttered. And it was one of the saddest days of my life when I went downtown to go to the library, I think. And then across the street was the old Camera theaters, and they had taken down the marquee. Oh. And I felt so like it was the most melancholy moment of my entire life. I was so sad.
What are your thoughts about people's attachment to, I feel like the story I hear is that, obviously theaters are losing money and people have gotten used to not going out for some reason over the last few years. We just all agreed it would be fun to stay home, I think. Is that what happened? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, totally.
Luckily, it's all over now, whatever it was.
Nothing cataclysmic. It was just, we don't want to go anymore.
And it's done now, wink. But, but people are, I hear people saying like, things like, oh, I don't even miss it. I like to watch it at home better anyway. And there's all these advantages of pause and go to the kitchen and whenever you want and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, there's this attachment to a lot of people I know are very attached to going to the theater and the theater experience. But it does seem like it's being threatened at least by a lack of crowds. What is your thought? I would assume you're a theater going guy, especially because you have AMC Movie Pass. That'd be weird if you're like, no, I hate it. Worst birthday present I ever got.
I could sit at home. Yeah, I got the A-list so I could sit at home and go, you know what? This is better. I'm just going to spend $22 a month to do nothing. No, like the theaters have always been like they're a church for me, because I'm not a religious person. I'm a hardcore atheist, but I understand why people would go to church, because me going to the theater, especially as a kid, was such a powerful experience and not necessarily the communal thing. Like I'm very much, I have, social anxiety. I don't like being around other people, really. But for some reason, being in a darkened theater in a big, expansive environment is such a magical thing to me.
It's interesting to be there to witness the sort of effects and the feelings that you get from the reaction sometimes of people. A lot of times, especially something that elicits laughter or excitement. I mean, you can look at however many YouTube videos about people's reactions to, the on your left line. See, as soon as I say that, people remember like, oh yeah, everybody freaked out when Sam showed up in Avengers Endgame or whatever.
Yeah, I was one of those people.
Yeah, no, I was there. I was like, oh, here it goes. And
that was the first moment I cried at the end of that movie. 3 times in total, but that was the first time. I was just like, oh my God, I'm so happy. He's alive. Oh.
It's funny, right? The way that and the way that you're able to get emotional with a story beat that you fully expect, right?
Yeah. He's coming back, but it's just the catharsis of that moment of just everything that they've gone through matters.
Yeah.
Because they finally got their friends back.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. And of course it harkens back to the Civil War when they first met, right? That was him saying on your left, running around, anybody who, I know, not Civil War.
Winter Soldier.
Jeez, Winter Soldier. Gosh. I just lost my fan card.
Shame on you. You just lost 3 nerd points.
I've only got 97 left before this call is abruptly ended. No, that is one of the things that I think is a powerful part that I really wanted to get some of your take on, which is the way that movies access emotions. And I'm going to use this as I don't know if it's kind of an analogy for it, is the social piece, which, as you just said, like, I'm one of those too. Like if I go to some big group of people that I don't know, I'm like, I'm not going to probably go. I don't want to go. I don't want to go to that. But yet at the same time, I'm maybe surrounded by, not so much now when the theaters are pretty empty, but you get a group of people, something comes on, people laugh, people cry, even heartbreak feels good in a place that whatever it is that happens. And you're there for it. And it adds something to the theater experience, adds something to the movie that then you sort of carry with you when you watch it and say, oh, I remember people freaked out. And oh, yeah, this was so, everybody laughed during this part. And it's okay. There's a social thing. There's a social component that makes it better, even if you're not necessarily grooving on social interactions with a lot of people in other settings, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, there's sometimes where I think storytelling can get us somewhere to an emotional place that we don't get other times, or at least we don't access them the same way.
Yeah, there's an old saying that Roger Ebert used to bandy about, and that's that movies are empathy machines. And I think that that's the most intuitive way to describe it, because the things that make me especially emotional watching movies are when I'm faced with a situation that I can relate to, even if it's something that is completely not of my life. Like, for instance, and this is going to sound like a really dorky pull, but let's say, for instance, the movie Cars 3. Mm-hmm. It's about living cars. So it's not really a life that I can tap into. And it is a movie in the Cars universe, so it's not something that I can glom onto because I can't stand those movies. But in watching the third one, at the end of the movie, I was kind of like, oh, this is charming, I guess. This is fine. Nothing wrong with this. And then at the end, in this most recent viewing that I did like a month ago, I'm just sobbing. Mm-hmm. And I don't really understand it, because I'm sobbing at talking cars. Like, clearly it reaches across the aisle and just kind of grabs you, and you can't really predict what is going to have an effect on you. But if it does, it does.
It's interesting, the things that, the things that come up for that. I remember, and I'll cry at anything. Basically.
Oh, me too.
Yeah, I'm a big. I find that that's probably one of the things I really enjoy about fiction, storytelling, and movies. We can lump in, TV nowadays too, because there's a lot of There's just a lot of similarities to the budgeting and the writing and some of the projects. So, one of the things that actually came to my mind when you're saying is this a weird poll or whatever, it was DuckTales, the new reboot of DuckTales. And there's a bunch of moments in there that are super emotional. They bring in a character who wasn't really in the old one, which is Della Duck, who is Huey, Dewey, and Louie's mother. And she's missing for the whole first season. She's been missing their whole life. And it turns out she's on the moon. She was exploring something in space, and something went wrong, and they were never able to find her. I guess mild spoilers for the second season of DuckTales reboot. So I probably should have said that first. Anyway, but there's a scene where she's on the moon, and through a whole series of events, there's this monster that's eating her ship while she's trying to repair it. And there's these other aliens that are she's kind of trying to help them. They're hunting this monster. Anyway, long story short, she finds out that there's a material on the ship that the monster needs to feed its baby. And there's this baby monster that is freaking out. And there's this part where she sings a lullaby to this baby monster that she used to sing to Huey, Dewey, and Louie back when they were eggs, right? So all of that obviously are experiences we've all had, right? As I just laid that out. Every listener right now is going and that's my Tuesday.
We all sing to monsters. It happens.
On the moon, after being separated from our families for a decade. We've all been there. But so I'm watching this thing, and I start to just really gets me, and I start crying as she's singing this little lullaby, and it hit me, and I'm like, somebody's doing something well in this storytelling. If I'm crying at this animated anthropomorphic duck who's singing to this moon monster's baby, right, nonverbal moon monster, and there's something that it hit inside me, and you're absolutely right. It's funny how sometimes you can't quite put your finger on it, especially when it's unexpected.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's not, there's some, I mean, it wasn't surprising when the first time I watched Finding Nemo was when it first came out in the theater, and I was like, oh, it's good. And yeah, it was emotional. But then a couple years later, when my son was old enough and a little kid to watch it, and when I sat down and watched it with him, and he's like, oh, what does that mean? And I'm like, it means he's trying to get his son. And that's another one that I watch, and particularly the part where all the other fish and animals start telling the story of how Marlin is facing so many things to try to find Nemo, and the story spreads, and it gets, see here, I'll start crying now. And then Nemo in the fish tank, the seagull tells him, hey, I heard about your dad, and he's faced a shark, and he's doing this, and Nemo's like, no, that can't be my dad. And he's like, well, his name's Marlin, right? And he's like, oh my gosh, my dad is doing all that for me? And it's like, oh.
Yeah, I can't imagine being a father and watching that. I would be a puddle of goo. Just I would not be corporeal anymore. I would just be just this spot on the carpet. I would be done.
Yeah. Well, there's those things. So sometimes you get something that's kind of obvious, but then sometimes it just kind of sneaks up on you too. And I'm one of those. I mean, with my background is in therapy and stuff, I think that there's something going on when we hit something at a moment like that where we are, generally at least, we're processing something.
Yeah.
Right. And nowadays, a lot of therapies are focused on some of the, cognitive behavioral therapy, of course, is that's what we think of when we think of therapy nowadays, is sitting and talking, maybe working on some coping skills and things. But to be frank, we usually actually think about psychoanalysis, which is sitting there, talk forever. We still have that concept, but it's a lot of the modern therapies like EMDR or internal family systems, different things like that are actually oriented at getting a little bit out of our head and just trying to tap into the emotions, right? And so, I don't know. So I think there's something therapeutic when we find ourselves all of a sudden, I'm having an emotional experience. Whether I expect it, whether it makes sense to me or not, I'm having it. and
Yeah.
a story or a movie is oftentimes a socially acceptable time to cry, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I particularly I cry usually when I don't necessarily have a life reference for something, but that it reminds me of something that I have a reference for, but it's not on the same level. Like a movie that just came out, Marcel the Shell with Shoes On.
I haven't seen it yet. I've been wanting to see that one.
So good. Oh my God. I spent the entire last half hour just sobbing in a almost empty theater, as I'm sure people were looking at me, and I was just kind of just wiping away my eyes and just like, no, I'm okay. I'm fine. No, this is okay. The shell found her family. It's fine. It's fine. I don't care. I don't whatever. But like, if you look at it, like, I mean, I'm not a shell. I mean, I still have my family. I've never lost them, but I know what that feeling is like.
Mm-hmm.
And there's really no better way to describe it. It's just that, you know, you see something and you're just like, I have no skin in this game, but I see what that character is going through and I recognize it. And so do my tear ducts.
Well, I know that's absolutely it, because we have certain experiences that are pretty universal to the human experience: grief, loss, fear. I feel like there's excellent storytelling being done with trauma nowadays, working that into.
Yeah.
And in fact, and I'm a big defender of the genre, even though people are like, oh, there's Marvel, blah blah blah, and there's Burnout, but of the not every individual superhero project is great, but I find that the ones that are good, that's what they're doing, is they're actually using. I mean, there's the practicality of storytelling to say, oh, we're going to use a format of a spy movie, or we're going to use the format of this, and superheroes are secondary to the plot, or we're going to tell the story of a small Muslim community in, Jersey City, but yet there's superheroes in it. But so I get that. That's the practical part. But they're using like the human connectivity. They're using, I mean, hell, we've done enough. Anybody who has been listening to the show, or you can scroll back through the thread here and just look at any of the Marvel projects that me and Sharon Blady have talked about, or anything like that, and you can see my feelings there. But the ones that land are the ones that are using emotion, or using trauma and loss and grief in a powerful way to be the motivators. Not just,
absolutely.
Somebody got killed. And so now we're upset, or someone's bad and now we're upset. It's more like, there's a real motivation that seems to be human. And so I feel like sometimes using a shell or some other like anthropomorphic duck or a talking car, sometimes, using that, or, even a person with superpowers, or a person who's a criminal, or a person that we wouldn't identify with in real life. Sometimes it almost gets past our defenses to say, hey, we're going to engage with you emotionally here. Oh, you are? All right, my guard's up. It's like, no, it's a movie about a shell. Really? I'm intrigued.
That sounds cute, I guess. And then you watch it and just like, oh, it's so beautiful. Oh.
And they're doing such a good job connecting people through, I don't know if weirdness is the right word, but well, yeah, kind of the weird. I mean, it's a pretty extreme thing to say, through a shell or through a bunch of stories that don't necessarily. You're like, oh, this is really weird, and then all of a sudden there's a gut punch of just like, oh, now it's very real,
right,
sort of thing. It's very intriguing to me how that works, and I'm very impressed with people who can do it the storytelling ways, who can really tap into
it's not an easy trick. I mean, you would think that just hitting an emotional button is something simple or something rudimentary, but it's really not. It really does require engagement, and engagement requires dedication. Like, it's not just something that you luck into.
Absolutely. And I think you can tell that when you watch something that does it poorly. Like where someone tries to do it ham-fistedly, or they think all I have to do. I mean, it's the old trope that I mentioned a minute ago of fridging someone, right? Oftentimes that's traditionally done to female characters, where, but someone dies purely because it's a motivation for the plot to move forward. And it's interesting because you can sneak it in a way. They can still do that if they do it well, and if they do it badly, it just pisses you off. It's just emotionally manipulative.
Yeah.
Right.
If you do it well, it's The Lion King. If you do it badly, it's Deadpool 2.
There you go. That's right. And famously, and Ryan Reynolds kind of made fun of that in one of the little videos he was making, right? About
and the writers said, we don't know what fridging means. We don't know what that is. It's like, well, you write comic book movies and you don't know what fridging is? Bullshit.
It's like, that's your bread and butter, guys. Come on. Yeah, comic books.
We've never heard this term. Are you kidding me? Yes, you have. Come on.
Comic books are paved on a road that's made of dead family members. Come on. It reminds me of the, was it Infinity War? I think where Thor meets the Guardians of the Galaxy. And it's like, they have that little face off, which is played off for comedy. And this is actually one of the things I really like about the MCU while we're on the subject, is that they have become self-aware to the point where they now are making fun of, and there are people in the universe that are poking fun at some of the tropes. But when Thor is like, oh, I had to kill my sister who, because my father and my brother, and he killed my brother and I had to, whatever. And, oh, well, I had to, kill my, trying to kill my adopted father. He's like, yeah, I had to kill my father too. We all had to kill our fathers. Let's calm down. Or whatever, that kind of like self-referential of like, oh yeah, wow, this is pretty, this is pretty messed up, this superhero family relations.
You take entire movies and you encapsulate them in 30 seconds. And it's like, oh, wow, all that happened? Oh, my God.
Yeah. It's like, I remember that in fact there was one season that I watched of 24 where it's like every episode was supposedly a 24-hour period or whatever. Yeah. Or no, every episode was...
Every hour is an hour.
That's right. There's 24 episodes. Right. Yeah. See, I forgot the gimmick already. So it's only been 20 years. But I watched one season in the middle of the run of 24, and it was like, this is kind of good. It's exciting. And somewhere around mid-season, it's like, okay, come on. It's like you've gone back and forth through LA 600 times, which is probably the least believable thing. A nuclear bomb was detonated. Somebody's family member died. They went home to comfort them, came back to work. You've traveled to another country, whatever it is. And it's like, wow, this is a hell of a day.
That's one long day.
And that's where it lands and that was the thing. I never went back to another season because it just felt like it's like, oh, you're just throwing in anything you can to say, and this is, maybe it's your favorite show and maybe all the listeners love it. I don't mean to come down on it, but that was one that landed for me. And I was like, I'm being kind of jerked around, manipulated here. But then I watched Breaking Bad, which I believe was very guilty of that on several occasions, but for some reason it got past my defenses. And it's like, oh, they're trying to justify within the first few episodes why they had to start killing people or something. And a little by little, slippery slope. I can see what they're doing. I know what you're doing, Breaking Bad, but I'm there for it. For some reason, it worked this time. But yeah, what are some of your thoughts about what does connect us to movies? Is there a universality that you see? We talked about some of the themes, I guess, that.
Yeah, I think that, I think that it really boils down to specificity. And strangely enough, the specificity of the universal. Like, you look at a story like, let's say, Turning Red, which just came out this year. It's about a tremendous film about a Chinese-Canadian 12-year-old girl who turns into a magical red panda. But besides that magical red panda part, just the idea that I'm watching a movie about characters that are living a life that I know nothing about. Mm-hmm. Like, A, I'm American, so I don't understand Canada. Not really. B, I'm Hispanic American, so I don't understand what it's like to be Chinese. And then I'm also 36 years old, so I don't remember what it's like to be 12, much less a 12-year-old girl. But dialing into all of that, I think, is what makes the experience so cathartic, is that you're really seeing a life that otherwise you would not be privileged enough to see. Mm-hmm. And I think that when that works, I think that's particularly impactful.
Yeah. That's a really interesting case too, because that's one where one of the things that I thought was creative about that was the resolution of that movie does not require you've got the overprotective parents, but it tells a story in such a way that you really kind of understand why, and you also empathize ultimately. And also,
for the first hour, you're sitting there going, "Oh, that mom needs to stop. She's being terrible." Yeah. And then in the last 30 minutes, you realize, no, she cares so much.
Yeah, and they do something very interesting, which is neither one has to change who they are for them to realize they're very much the same. That's one of the things I thought was very powerful in it. Because especially once you get to be an adult, and especially once you become a parent, sometimes this trope of like parents just being terrible just because they're terrible, you watch that and you're like, okay, here we go. You can't help but to see that and say, oh no, I get that kind of terrible. I do that. Oh, we went a little too far there, but I get it. The perspective changes. That's another interesting thing about watching stories and movies, I think, is how your perspective changes. And
yeah, absolutely.
I look at the young couple in love in a movie now, and I look at their parents, right? Because my oldest is 18, right? And so it's like I now kind of look at the parents and have empathy and connection to them as obviously you're meant to put yourself in the protagonist's seat, right? But I look at that and say, oh, it's old people that are just slugging away and they're making it work at their stage of life. I get it. I get that, kind of thing. So you go back and watch something with an ensemble story cast or something. I remember that this is a kind of obscure poll, but Lark Rise to Candleford, which is like one of those British shows that was on PBS and stuff. But I remember watching it when I was younger and identifying with the people that were up and coming, starting out their adult life, blah, 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 and kind of being like, oh, wow, that one character's parents kind of suck. And then watching it again and being like, they rock. They're really making that middle life time. They really are actually very good parents, and they're really fighting for their family. And it's like, and now watching it and seeing the old decrepit person on it. No, I'm maybe I'm not quite there yet, but maybe I just identify with old grumpy men all the time, but that's whatever.
Yeah. That's why I love Up. I could just sit there and go, what a crotchety old man. I love him.
Yeah. You hit that guy with that thing. That was awesome. Maybe he doesn't need a story arc for me. Just go around hitting people with your cane. But yeah, no, and that is once again an interesting thing when you see. I've found that sometimes, and I'm one of those people that when I hear a story pitch, when someone is saying to me like, oh, this movie's coming out, it's going to be like this. I'm like, it's the weirder it sounds, and to me is the more original, right? Like I remember when I heard, the first trailer for that was just a guy puts a bunch of balloons on his house and floats away, and I'm like, I'm already in, because it's weird, it's cool, and then you get there, and then of course like that Up is a really good example of. Once again, it's death and grief, but it felt so real in just the first. There's no dialogue really in the first little bit, hardly any.
And if done differently, it becomes manipulative.
Yeah.
But done the way that Pete Docter did it, it is so palpably emotional that you just sit there and you go like, I haven't had this experience before. Mm-hmm. I didn't lose anyone like this. I didn't have an entire life. Like I'm only halfway through my life yet. Mm-hmm. So I don't know what it's like to be cresting that wave, but in watching it, you understand.
Yeah, it's such a powerful thing, and Up might be a good example for us to hit on a little bit. To say we're hitting a lot of animated movies today for some reason.
A lot of Pixar.
Yeah, this is a pro. Well, they're another sponsor of the show. Fingers crossed. Once they hear this, Old Man Pixar is going to call me up later this afternoon. Before I want to
sponsor you. I want to sponsor you, Zenny.
It's like we were listening. I know you haven't released it yet, but we were listening to the recording, and. So yeah, what do you think it was that made the difference of that segment? Because that could easily be fridging, right? It's like here's Ellie, I believe is her name.
Yeah, Ellie.
And Ellie dead. That's a lot of what moves the plot along, and so it could easily fall into that trap. But I wonder why. I wonder if that goes back to your idea of specificity that we get.
I think so. I mean, I think that with that story. it's not necessarily the entire plot doesn't necessarily hinge on Ellie's death, but I think that what it does is it provides context for the person that Carl becomes. Mm-hmm. And then it's one of those things where, like, without that death, I don't know that his journey would be that much more impactful. So if you think about, like, well, what if I remove that part? What if I just take Ellie take her out of the equation altogether? So they didn't meet, they didn't fall in love. Do you get to the point that you need to get to? And I think that you can look at that as a screenwriter, or you can look at that as an audience member. But it's a weird kind of dichotomy, because in lesser hands, it does become fridging. Mm-hmm. But I think that in the context of the film, I think that it's completely acceptable.
Well, it's interesting as you say that too, because I hadn't thought about it this way before, but some of the things is like his access to adventure in his life is Ellie. Because there is the scene with dialogue before they have a life together where they're kids. And right. She's kind of like, hey, we're going to go have this adventure and have fun. And he's like this kid, the kind of kid who's like, I don't know if that's appropriate. And
he's the Chucky of the group. I don't know, Tommy. That doesn't sound too good.
Yes. And you can see where the invading force, in a way, even during that little montage, is practicality. They have to keep smashing the jar that's their trip money, right?
Yeah.
And they have to keep smashing the jar. They have to face infertility issues. There's these like invading, either just the mundane things of life or the tragedies of life are invading to like stifle.
There's a miscarriage in there. Like there's a miscarriage in a Disney movie. That's amazing.
And yeah, absolutely. And then because you realize in part of that too, where he's finally like, I'm just going to buy some tickets. And once again, this is all nonverbal and takes place in about 4 minutes or something.
Yeah. It's a purely cinematic sequence.
Yeah. And so he goes, so obviously they must have been doing well enough that he was able to purchase the tickets. And so they could have before, then they didn't, and all this. And when he loses her, his life becomes so mundane. And then it's the memory of her as he goes forward to say, I'm going to go to that place she always wanted to see. So she's in a way still a gateway for adventure.
Yeah. And absolutely. She's the motivating factor. She's still there. She's gone, but her spirit is still there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Very, very interesting how that's tied out. And like you say, you don't have all those experiences, but then again, we all have experiences of like, you hit a point where you're like, will this dream ever be realized? And we've all had to hit some kind of struggle with that, I think. And to be honest, I've actually had the experience of meeting some people over the years in my career who maybe they didn't have that experience for a long, long time. And maybe in their middle age, or maybe when, something happened in adulthood and everything had kind of gone the way that they'd planned on in their life. And that feels like a blessed life until you hit something that you can't control. And it's absolutely devastating. And for people who have had things mostly go their way, it's even more devastating than people who come in and say, I'm going through a really hard time. I've been through hard times before, but I need to work through this one. They might still be devastated, but it's different. There's a survivability, or at least a confidence in my own survivability when we've had struggles. So I wonder if that ties in too. At the same time, it's like we're talking about the general mass appeal of something that we don't identify with, but you're absolutely right. And I think it's a certain emotional specificity, right? To say that we tie in with that. Oh, they got me. Yep. I know that feeling.
Yeah. I think that sometimes it's movies that, I can't sit there and do like a 1-to-1 correlation and go like, oh yes, I know this. I think that sometimes being in a situation where I don't know something, I think that might actually trigger my emotions maybe even easier.
Mm-hmm. I'll say one that came out in the last few years, and it's interesting that this one became sort of controversial because some people didn't like the way he approached it, but was when Taika Waititi made Jojo Rabbit. What if I said Thor Ragnarok? But or Hunt for the Wilder People, another awesome movie.
And his movie, What We Do in the Shadows, the most emotional movie of the last 10 years.
And the most controversial. Oh, yeah, I don't know if vampires are funny. Nice try, Taiki. No, but all great movies, actually. I really do enjoy I enjoy all the ones we mentioned. But Jojo Rabbit, it really rocketed up for me on my list of really meaningful movies. And I don't know, I'll be interested to see what you think of it. But for me, the use I had the same hesitations going in that people talked about, which is like, let's not make Hitler funny. But the way that he actually does it, I think it goes back to that idea of getting past your defenses, right? Is that here's this manifestation of Hitler that the kid has, and at first it's like, oh, he's kind of funny, and well, I'll go there. It seems like what a 10-year-old would fantasize about his leader being like his buddy, but then he weaves in several things that are not very funny, and I felt like I was transported into the shoes of someone who'd been brainwashed. With all of the little traps that are there to say, well, you can't actually, I'll be nice and funny to get you to do what you need to do. And then when you're not going to do it or you start doubting, I'm going to get evil and mean. And, it's not funny all of a sudden. And there's some parts of that movie that you can feel like a palpable terror of living in that state. Right.
Yeah. There's the moment when he finds his mom.
Oh my gosh.
We only see the shoes.
Yeah.
And it's one of those, oh my God. Like, that was a movie that I wasn't necessarily wild about, but that moment in particular got me. It's one of those things, talk about a gut punch.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where you can't imagine a child having to see something like that. Mm-hmm. And to have it be not only a child seeing something like that, but not necessarily being surprised that you're going to find someone important in that situation.
Yeah. Exactly. And then of course there's the foreshadowing of that where you see you watch it, especially go back and watch it again, you see all the shots of her shoes from the level where he just sees her shoes, she's standing higher than him at the swimming pool or on the wall or whatever, those kinds of things. And that was a really, really powerful moment. I think it's my favorite Scarlett Johansson feeling, but or not feeling. Scarlett Johansson role, I should say. But
I would go with her, but great performance.
I haven't seen her. I missed that one. I forgot about that.
Tremendous. She's not actually on screen. She's just the voice of a phone. But one of the sexiest performances I think I've ever seen, which is weird because it's only a voice.
Right.
But
she plays an AI,
really,
right? I remember when it came out and I was like, I got to see that, and then forgot to see it.
Take the time. It is a fantastic film.
Interesting. For me, one of the moments in Jojo Rabbit that communicated the emotion that I wasn't expecting to be part of it was, they had they wove in like a closeted gay character. They wove in, a couple of things that were kind of under the radar, but was when, and it was Stephen Marchant, actually, I've never seen him in a role that I thought was anything other than goofy before that, shows up with the Gestapo people. And they have these they play this little bit for comedy, which is everybody saying Heil Hitler to each other over and once it starts again, it starts again. All right, well, Heil Hitler, and
it's
and
the doctor joke from Spies Like Us.
Yeah, exactly.
Doctor.
And yet at the same time, they put that in a scene where it's very obvious that this is a world in which you have no control over your own fate, your own privacy, your own life. And they just walk in the house, they're looking around, and depending on if you answer this question correctly or not, you could die, right?
Right.
And it was it stripped away a lot of that, oh, it's funny. It's like, oh, there's still this kind of humor, but in a way it accentuated even more to say there's this thin veneer of politeness that's there, and at any moment, bam, that's going to get stripped away, and you could be tortured, you could be dead, doesn't matter if you're a child, that kind of thing. And I think once again, the kind of the humor aspect sort of lowered the defenses to say, bam, this is what that would have been like. And I thought it was effectively done. So, and once again, that perspective of saying, and I think nowadays, personally, I think nowadays is an important time to understand that feeling of what happens when people's freedoms are taken away. What does that feel like to be on the receiving end of that? And hopefully that empathy can, be very, very useful.
And that's the key word there, empathy. That's the best, when these movies access our emotions, that's the surefire way to get through is it's a human condition. We all hurt, we all feel. If we can just understand that, then we might be okay. Like, we'll still have issues, but we might be salvageable as a species.
Don't you think that's one of the things that we're looking for? I mean, that feeling of being acceptable, that feeling of being okay, of being able to be brave or funny or clever, to be like one of the members of the group. I mean, and in this case, maybe just the family of being human.
Yeah.
Yeah. I got really deep there for a minute. Did you like that? It's like, man, what is society, man? It's all a construct. No, but I think
trails, man, trails.
Money's just an idea. Anyway, all of which are true, by the way. But there is that just wanting to belong, that wanting to be accepted, and I think you're absolutely right. And where sometimes the showcasing of certain attributes, that's where a flawed character is good, and I think sometimes when people are just trying to be dark for dark's sake or flawed for flawed's sake and say, watch how flawed I can make this character. It's not that can't be interesting, but it doesn't have the same resonance when it's like, oh, well, you liked this movie? That was dark. Well, in this movie, we got a guy who eats people's brains or whatever. I don't know what that one was. That's my spec script that I'm workshopping about eating brains, apparently. But you know what I mean?
It's a sequel to Hannibal.
That's true. He ate somebody's brain, didn't he? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he made him eat his own brain.
Oh, no, that's right. You know what's funny? It's so funny this is one of the things about being a culture and movie nerd is there's so many things that I haven't seen that I knew that. It's Ray Liotta in the scene where he's numbed up and he doesn't realize he's eating his own brain. And I've never seen it, but somehow I knew that was happening.
You're not missing anything. Yeah. I'll tell you this now. You're fine.
It's like that I was just talking with family or for some friends last night about Dune and the concept that I'd never read the Dune books. I saw the Lynch film long time ago, liked it, but didn't remember anything particularly about it. And so just based off of cognitive memory, I should have gone in and been like, I don't know what's going on exactly. I have no idea what to expect. But I actually knew. No, I know he's this messianic figure, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, so I had this like working knowledge of Dune. And I was like, where did I get that? I don't know. Just soaked it up somewhere from being a nerd.
Yeah. It's just osmosis.
Yeah.
It's all cultural osmosis.
Which is why Osmosis Jones is my favorite movie. Let's talk about that. No, just kidding. Once again, never seen that one, actually.
So when Frank got sick and they had to put the cold pill down his throat.
I always think in my mind that he got sick from an elephant, but that's another movie, isn't it? Where Bill Murray takes care of an elephant?
That's larger than life.
Seen. Okay. And who's in Operation Dumbo Drop? Let's solve that.
That's Ray Liotta. It's Ray Liotta and Danny Glover.
Does he eat his brain in that one too? Is that like his thing? That's like his.
That's a deleted scene. It didn't make it in the final cut.
That's like his Tom Cruise runs in every role thing. It's like I got to eat my brain.
I'll take this role, but I got to eat my own brains.
Or the Javier Bardem terrible haircut, whatever. Tom Hanks peeing. These are all things people can go look up online, and those things happen in a lot of roles for those particular actors. I don't know if they ask for that. I know Tom Cruise probably makes himself run in all his movies because he's a good runner. Let's be honest.
Well, he looks at scripts and he rifles through them and goes, I don't see any running. Pass.
You know what you didn't get to do because when the Reels of Justice boys were on the show, I had them all suggest a movie that told something about mental health or gave a perspective in mental health, and they gave a recommendation. So I'm going to make it a little more free and easy for you because our topic is a little broader today, and I didn't tell you that I was going to do this. Do you have any thoughts about a movie that presents, let's say, either ties into emotion or touches on mental health or, does anything like that that you'd recommend people catch?
Yeah, so it's not a fiction film, but it is kind of like a monologue filmed I believe, from Broadway. And it is called Wishful Drinking. It's Carrie Fisher's one-woman show. I think you can find it on HBO and HBO Max. Carrie Fisher was one of my favorite people, still is, who has ever lived. She's my bipolar princess. I love her. I miss her. And she speaks a lot about living with manic depression. And as somebody who is bipolar himself, it's something that really gets me. And it's not necessarily like an emotional thing. Like, she turns everything into a joke because that's how she can process.
She's very funny too when I've read things. Yeah.
Yes. She is hysterical. And it's one of those things where if you truly understand what she went through as a person and what she continued to go through to the very end, I think it's one of the most rewarding experiences you can have. Like, if you don't know anything about Carrie Fisher other than the fact that she was Princess Leia, it's very much required viewing, because you need to see the full image of what this person was.
Huh. You know, I've read a little bit of some of her talk about what it was like being Princess Leia and some of the struggles there, and read a little bit about what she said about bipolar and addiction. Always found it very insightful, very funny. So I've never seen this. I didn't know about this. This is interesting. I should check this out.
It is. It's about an hour and a half. It's no muss, no fuss. Not a hard sit at all. It packs in a lot, and it really leaves an impact. So
that's Wishful Drinking.
Yes.
And it's literally a filming of her one-woman show.
Yes.
Awesome. That's very good. I didn't know we were twinners. I didn't know we were bipolar buddies. I also have bipolar disorder, and find that I really like when people have insights about that process of the mania and the depression, because it is something that is, from an insider perspective, pretty weird.
Yeah, so it's something nice that she had to. It's something that she had to discover on her own. Like, it was when we didn't really know much about brain chemistry and about, chemical imbalances and all this stuff. And so she's basically she's being a pioneer in this case, because she's encountering it on her own and ascribing new details to it that can help people that are undergoing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting to hear. I'll have to dig into it a little bit and see her experience. I wasn't diagnosed until I was quite a bit into my career as a mental health professional. So it's very interesting to me when people get diagnosed and what they find. I mean, I was only 5 or 6 years ago that I was first diagnosed, and since then discovered some ADHD as well, and how that complicates it and interacts with it and stuff. But
I actually have the exact same story. I was not diagnosed until about 8 years ago, and also have ADHD and Asperger's. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like it's a dump truck being laid on my chest.
Yeah.
But I'm glad I know now. I'm glad that I can now process life and know that there are people who have gone before me and they've lived okay lives, and I can do so myself. It's not a death sentence.
That's the thing. Yeah. People think of it as like some of these buzzwords that we hear. Bipolar is one of them, obviously, but they think of it, and I think Asperger's can be, I think personality disorders get treated this way, as if it's like the psychological equivalent of leukemia or something. It's like, oh, you're done. It's like, no, not at all, actually. Yeah. It's highly, I found the diagnostic information to be actually quite helpful. I know some people don't like labels, I'm air quoting. But for me, it's like, that's actually been really helpful for me. I don't know. Did you find having the right attached diagnosis, the title, was helpful?
Yeah. I mean, because I lived for most of my life with these feelings that I couldn't reconcile. I couldn't identify. I just knew that there was something different about me, but I couldn't ascribe any particular knowledge to it. It's just living with it. And then finding out is kind of like a breath of fresh air. It's a relief.
Yeah.
It's a weight taken off my chest.
Well, and particularly if you're one that's, and I'm fortunate enough to have been like the one of the first prescriptions that I got, and I've had maybe an addition to it or whatever, but I got put on Lamitragene pretty early on, and it made a tremendous difference to my quality of life. And so I know a lot of people don't have success with meds and have to sort of you go back and forth and try different things. And I've been lucky enough that while there's been dosage increases and I've added some anxiety stuff and whatever, medication's been wonderful addition to my life. And with bipolar disorder, it just, you have to do something to stabilize it other than just groovy thoughts.
Right.
So, because even within mental health, I'll tell you, there's a lot of people I know who work in mental health or who would say, oh, I'm a mental health advocate, that are like, yeah, I don't know if I want to take the meds or my kids to take the meds. I'm just not sure how I feel. And it's like, no, it's wonderful if you have the right prescription. It can be, I should say. And I'm certainly not trying to diminish the experience of anybody who has had the frustrating experience of not finding something that helps medication-wise, because I know that can be very demoralizing too. So we've done quite a few episodes about some of the things that people are trying with ketamine or with other things that are addressing some of the medication-resistant conditions, which is wonderful that they're doing something other than just going, because a lot of people have that experience too. So. Well, this has been just as wonderful, just exactly as wonderful as I anticipated. No more, no less. It's been so much fun to be able to talk to you about this, and it opens up. I don't know. It opens up the door for. There's other things I'd love to pick your brain about some of the experiences and the diagnosis things. We'll probably talk again if you're up for it about some.
Oh, absolutely.
Things. I always like to ask people as well to suggest a charity or a nonprofit that is something that is near and dear to their heart. And I never really prepare anyone for that. I just like to spring it on them. And it does not have to touch on anything that we've talked about. It certainly can, but it doesn't have to. Anything at all that you would share with people that you think they should look up, get to know, support, stuff like that?
I'm going to go really simple and just go St. Jude's.
Oh, that's a good one.
They're taking care of kids. They never turn away anybody because they don't have insurance and they can't pay. They're doing again, as I said, I'm an atheist, but they're doing the Lord's work.
There you go.
They really are, and you can donate. Literally, like if you go to Domino's Pizza, you can donate with your order. You can donate basically anywhere. If you go to the movie theaters, you'll see the ad right before the movie shows. They're doing great work.
I like a lot of those I think those donation programs are clever where the company will agree. And, I'm sure that there's some that are just for show and the company's giving pennies, blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, if it's a big enough company, they might as well be giving something. And at least to people who might not have the means, or they might not have the organizational skills or memory that it takes to consistently donate anywhere. And so at least it's one way for that mechanism to go, and some companies are actually, I'm sure, doing really well with it. But yeah, St. Jude's that's a great one. I don't think anyone's ever mentioned that one on the show before, but there's a hospital just down in Salt Lake City, about a half hour from where I live, that's a St. Jude's. And it's really interesting to see the experiences people have with that. And yeah, it's become such a barrier to health treatment at all, is the cost, and the insurance is such a nightmare, particularly for us here in the U.S. and some other places. The cost of medical care is so astronomical that it's great that there's some organizations that are trying to address that,
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Ryan. Tell everybody before we go where they find you. You do another movie podcast in addition to the Reels of Justice.
Yes, I do. Well, I'm working on it right now, but it'll drop in October, first week of October, called One Track Mind, where I analyze films through their audio commentaries, and it's very much a pro physical media in this age of streaming and whatever nonsense, trying to remind people that before there were podcasts, there were commentaries. And without commentaries, we don't have podcasts. It's just that simple.
I hadn't ever thought about the tie-in between commentaries and podcasts. That's deep, man. I'm going to be thinking about that. That I also don't know it might be out there, but I don't know of a podcast that covers audio commentaries. I've never heard one before. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's the only one that matters because it's the only one that exists.
Right, exactly.
It doesn't matter because it's good. It matters because there's nothing else.
Well, let's just say, especially if you're going to do something with movies, that's what I love about your guys' show, The Reels of Justice. If you're going to do a movie show, you got to find some kind of a wrinkle that isn't just a bunch of people talking about movies. There's there has to be something interesting about it, or just, obviously the personalities also have to be interesting and warm and funny and sincere.
You need
a
gimmick.
Things you guys have. I used to love to listen to those, and it's so funny when you talk to people who've listened to audio commentaries because they'll be commonly shared experiences of like, oh yeah, and in that one part you can tell that there was a disagreement about this between the star and the director, and they talked about this, and there's stories you don't hear anywhere else that pop up on those things, and they don't stream those. It's true. You'd have to buy a DVD or a Blu-ray to get those, don't you?
Yeah. You can occasionally find them on YouTube, but I would recommend instead of going to this stupid streaming site, YouTube,
I'm not familiar.
Buy a Blu-ray, you deadbeat.
It's an interesting thing how everything advanced so fast into the high tech that we're sort of going back to low tech for some solutions. I think especially as streaming services have become so diversified and so contentious, and so all of a sudden it's like we're going to take these down forever. You'll never see them again. And in the days of physical media, it's like you still have people with a DVD of maybe a TV series that you can't find anywhere that you can I can sit and watch. News radio because they have all of the things or something, whatever. I don't know why I picked news radio. I don't know of anywhere where that's streaming. I think that's why I picked it.
Ironically, news radio is the TV show with the most audio commentaries per episode.
Really?
Than any other. There are some episodes that have 2. And in the first and second season DVD, I believe there are 30 episodes, and I believe there are 36 commentaries, if I remember correctly.
Wow, that would be fascinating to listen to. I loved that show when it was
it's brilliant. It's one of the best sitcoms ever made.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to do a news radio segment. That'll be for the Patreon. That'll pack them in. I'm really good at picking really obscure things for the Patreon that no one wants to pay for. But all right, Ryan, thank you so much. We'll talk again soon.
Of course. Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to the Court Arts Podcast Network. To listen to more Court Arts shows, visit courtemparts.com.